We start in Poland, where the Defense Ministry says 2 large migrant groups breached the border from Belarus overnight. And Belarus accuses Polish security forces of severely beating several migrants who tried to cross. But it's nearly impossible to independently verify the information coming from both sides. Authorities have created an exclusion zone that bars journalists and aid workers from the area where thousands of people remain stranded. Belarus says it won't stop migrants trying to enter Poland to reach the EU. Poland has deployed troops to repel what it calls an attack.
Desperate scenes on Europe's doorstep. Thousands of migrants camped out in the freezing cold. Among them babies set to be as young as 2 months old, as tension continues to build between Poland and Belarus. Poland's Prime Minister, Mateusz Morawiecki, accuses Belarus of using the migrants as live shields in a new kind of hybrid warfare. It must be strongly emphasized that our security and the security of our eastern border is violated in a very brutal way. This is an exceptional situation, the first such situation in 30 years, when we can say that the security and the integrity of our border is so brutally attacked and tested. The EU accuses Belarus of flying migrants into Minsk, then helping them get to the borders with its EU neighbors, in an effort to destabilize the bloc. Belarus denies this, blaming Poland for escalating the crisis and using excessive force to push back migrants. Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko says he does not want an armed confrontation, but still refuses to back down. Taking up arms in the modern world is suicide. It's suicide, let alone here in the center of Europe, let alone with Belarus. So many wars were fought in this strip of land, and they all started here. As the saber rattling grows louder, they're the ones caught in the middle. Poland has declared a state of emergency along the border and shut official crossing points, adding to the despair here. Why is Poland closed? I want to go to Germany. I'm not going to Poland. No one here wants to stay in Poland.
Where are you going? To Poland or
yes,
to Germany?
Poland. Yes, Germany.
Why you go to Germany?
It's the country, the good country.
You want to work, tak?
Yes, to work, yes.
Most of the migrants come from the Middle East. People fleeing war or poverty, now used as pawns in a geopolitical standoff that's already proving deadly. Close to a dozen migrants have lost their lives so far, some of exhaustion, others freezing to death. Human rights groups warn the situation is growing more dire by the day, with food and medicine in short supply and sub-zero temperatures dipping even further. A humanitarian crisis unfolding as the threat of conflict grows.
And in Bialystok, near the Belarusian-Polish border, we are now joined by correspondent Marina Strauss. Marina, where are you there exactly, and what is the situation there?
Yeah, we are in Bialystok this morning because we talked to Polish authorities which are based here. But yesterday night we went to the border and tried to get as close as possible. But as you mentioned in the report, as it was mentioned in the report, there's an emergency zone in place at the border. So we're stopped by police cars, as were other media people, other journalists. We are not allowed to enter this emergency zone. So we cannot really verify what's happening at the border with Belarus. We have to trust the Polish government and videos they post on social media. And I talked to the spokeswoman of the Polish border guards this morning, and she said we have to protect the border. She mentioned that, she repeated that a couple of times. And she said that the Polish border guards are not using violence. We, of course, also cannot verify that. Polish media reports say differently, and also migrants and refugees we talk to say differently.
So why doesn't Poland allow aid organizations or independent journalists into that area?
There's no official explanation for that, or at least no official explanation that we as journalists or also the NGOs understand. Also, I just repeat what the spokeswoman of the border guard said. She says we have to protect this zone, so we want no one in there. We have to protect the border. We have to protect the border of the European Union. But of course, there's a lot of anger among journalists here, among NGOs, because we are usually used to cover the situation. We cover a lot of migrant situations in different countries, and usually you can go there, you can see what's happening, you can talk to migrants, and this is not the case here.
So what do you think the feeling is in the Polish government and also in the Polish populations? Are they doing the dirty work for the EU right now?
The Polish society is divided, I would say. I mean, especially in this region, there are many volunteers who help the refugees, who help the migrants, who bring them blankets and food. We just talked to some refugees earlier in the morning. They said they're really thankful for what the Polish people are doing to help them. But of course, the other part of the population, or many people also think, we have to protect our border, which is also the border of the European Union, and we have to make sure that the Belarusian government doesn't put us under pressure, and it's actually the Belarusians' fault that these people are there, and they are actually okay with not letting migrants and refugees into Poland.
Our correspondent Marina Strauss there in Bialystok. Thank you. Well, earlier today we spoke to Manfred Weber. He's the chair of the Conservatives in the European Parliament, and we asked him if walls and barbed wire is really the answer to the thousands of refugees suffering at the border between Belarus and Poland.
No one from outside can decide who is allowed to enter the border. We decide. That is the key message. But let me be also clear. We have to balance this approach, and that means we have to take care about the people. The people are the victims. The migrants on the border are the victims. And that's why any kind of aggressivity against them, any kind of not respecting human basic rights are not acceptable for the EPP family. Both things are equally important. Strong, strict implementation of rules in the border and taking care about people. Those who are participating in this hybrid war and are earning money with this, they must face a serious answer from the European Union. So we have to stop the business model of Lukashenko, and that is in the best interest of those who are suffering now on the border and feeling the winter coming up. Vladimir Putin is trying to destabilize the European Union, to split the European Union. And this is orchestrated also by him, no doubt about this. He's financing the things which are creating problems now for Lukashenko with the sanctions. So that's why it is a combined challenge for us. And yes, that's why it is needed also to talk with the Russian neighbors and to tell them, sorry, we mean it. Enough is enough. If you want to have partnership, let's do so. But if you want to go to a very aggressive approach, then you feel the answer from the European Union. And that's why also towards Russia, all options are on the table. You know, we speak about an extremely important issue, about the question whether you can blackmail the European Union. We want to be serious. We want to be a good neighbor. We want to help and assist also migrants in the refugee camps. But therefore, we need partners in our border.
That was Manfred Weber, chairman of the Conservative Party bloc in the European Parliament, speaking to us a short time ago. Now, the European Union says Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko is deliberately sending migrants to his country's border with the EU. But how are these people caught in the middle of a standoff actually getting there? Well, beginning in the Middle East, in countries like Iran, Iraq and Syria. Western officials say Belarus is allowing thousands of asylum seekers to get on flights bound for the Belarusian capital, Minsk. And once they get there, Belarus is accused of encouraging the migrants to go towards its European neighbours, Latvia, Lithuania and Poland. Belarusian officials then bring them to those borders and urge them to cross on foot. In response, all three countries have tightened their border security. Many of the migrants say they don't want to stay in Eastern European countries. They hope to go further west, as we've heard, to countries like Germany. Joining me now is Gerald Kains, founding chairman of the European Stability Initiative think tank, and he is a migration analyst and helped shape the Turkey migrant deal in 2016. Mr. Kains, Belarus leader Lukashenko is accused of exploiting these desperate migrants and sending them to the borders to sow chaos and instability. Has that worked, you think?
Well, the problem is that it is working probably even better than he expected. The European Union is lost. It has no strategy. It is desperately trying to do things that will not work. You cannot stop all flights to Russia or Belarus from all over the world because people can change flights at airports. So people will get to Belarus, and Lukashenko sees that when he moves them to the border, he creates a moral, political and strategic challenge that the European Union is unprepared for. Political, because it is divided. Moral, because it is breaking all its basic laws, conventions and the respect for human dignity by pushing people back into the cold. And strategic, because he is sending a lesson that don't dare to put sanctions on countries because we will retaliate with migrants.
So EU leaders are calling this hybrid warfare. From what you just said, I think you might agree.
Well, I think the language, he certainly sees it as a war, but the language hides that we are dealing with real people. The problem is that what Lukashenko is doing is he's trying to show that the EU is hypocritical because the force, the violence that we have at that border, and the reason journalists and aid organizations, even Frontex, the European Border Agency, are not allowed close to the border, suggests that the violence that is being used also by European officials is completely in violation of not only EU but also international law. And Manfred Weber is right. We should protect, control the border, and we shouldn't do so at the expense of the values that set us apart.
So what to do then? That's a dilemma you're describing there, quite correctly, I think. But so what's the recipe then for the EU? You said the EU is lost. How can the EU get back on the right track here?
Well, first of all, the EU has been divided on these issues for a long time. This is directly directed at one country in particular, which is Germany. It is the country to which most migrants want to go. It is the country that is at the heart also of debates on sanctions. Germany needs to act now with some partners, and it is clear that the only way that could be effective is to find a humane way to get people to stop going to Belarus, to be exploited. They pay for this. Lukashenko earns money from this, and then they are in a trap. So Germany should reach out to countries in Eastern Europe, democracies like Ukraine or Moldova. These countries are directly threatened by this, because if the EU gives in to Lukashenko and Putin, they will be, when there is another aggression, not be able to rely on the threat of European sanctions. So Ukraine and Germany should talk together with America about a strategy that from a cut-off date, anyone who comes from Belarus into Poland or Lithuania will be taken to Ukraine lawfully. This is not in violation of the Refugee Convention. They will not be left in the forest. They will not be left to die. But no, they will not reach Germany, which is the promise on which Lukashenko relies to lure people to Minsk and Belarus.
Well, why would Ukraine accept these refugees? Does Germany need to write a big check there, or how is this going to work?
Well, of course, the European Union has to then, in return, I call it an anti-blackmail pact between European countries in the EU and European democracies in Eastern Europe. An anti-blackmail pact where Ukraine helps Germany and the EU against the blackmail from Minsk, while at the same time, Europe, the EU, Germany need to do more to help Ukraine against blackmail and threat from Russia. It is not something that Ukraine will do if it's not in its interest. Obviously, it will need support for this. But beyond that, it is in the strategic interest of Ukraine that the attempt to blackmail the EU with what is still a small number of a few thousand people at the border is not successful. Because if it is successful, the whole security situation for Ukraine, faced by a Russian threat, as in 2014, will change immediately, and that will make Ukraine a lot less secure.
You mentioned Russia there. How would you describe Russia's role in all this? Can the EU ignore Russia there?
Well, Russia wants the EU to reach out and negotiate. Russia wants to be seen as the country that pulls the strings, and this we saw in the last 2 days. Initially, this was, of course, a reaction by the dictator in Minsk, Mr. Lukashenko, but the mocking remarks from Russian politicians and officials in recent days saying, well, EU, why don't you just give Lukashenko a lot of money? Or blaming Poland that there are these migrants in the first place because Poland stood with the United States in the very unfortunate invasion of Iraq. Russians show that they are making fun of the EU, and they want to prove to the Europeans that they are hypocrites who don't respect their own values, that they are weak, that they are divided, and that in future Europe should never again consider putting sanctions on any country, whether Belarus or Russia, because at its borders there will then appear thousands, tens of thousands of migrants. And that is, of course, a very successful gambit for Russia, and they are not even hiding how much they're enjoying it.
Gerald Kains, there, founding chairman of the European Stability Initiative think tank. Thank you very much.